Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation, mesdames et messieurs. Cher Olivier, encore merci beaucoup. En effet, je me réjouis d'avoir l'occasion de vous adresser la parole ici même à Paris. Je commence en français. L'honneur est d'autant plus grand lorsqu'on regarde la liste des intervenants. Je ne peux m'empêcher de commencer par une notice autobiographique concernant Paris. Je suis un produit de Paris. Mes parents, tous les deux suisses, s'étaient connus dans le 14e arrondissement et vivaient 10 ans dans une colonie d'artistes proche de la place Alésia, à la rue Châtillon, qui s'appelle d'autrement aujourd'hui. Mon père, le sculpteur argovien Pierre Hächler, ayant fait ses études aux Beaux-Arts de Genève tout d'abord, selon le vieux de son père, une année d'architecture, ensuite 3 années en sculpture. Par la suite, Pierre Hächler se rendit à Paris afin de poursuivre ses études auprès de Germaine Richier, une des rares femmes sculpteurs de renommée internationale et collègue proche d'Alberto Giacometti. Cette vie occupe alors une place particulière dans ma biographie. Ça, c'est mon père dans l'atelier, auprès de l'atelier de Germaine Richier, ici à Paris. Et je montre 2 sculptures. Vous voyez le filet de sol qu'il a fait ici à Paris, qu'on voit l'influence d'Alberto Giacometti. Et puis une sculpture d'une face plus tard abstrait. Je vous montre d'abord des impressions de son atelier en Suisse. Je pense qu'il a porté cette atmosphère du atelier de Paris en Suisse. C'est chez elle, chez Germaine Richier, qu'il a pris la méthode à analyser les formes de façon géométrique. On rendait ainsi en modèle ce qu'on voyait vraiment et non pas ce qu'on l'on crut voir. Plus tard, il se tournait vers l'abstraction de la nature jusqu'à ce que celle-ci se soit vidée d'elle-même, comme il aimait à le préciser lui-même. Le minimalisme américain qui émergeait dans les années 60 du siècle dernier ne le satisfait guère, mais les structures primaires l'inspiraient dans son travail, dans lequel s'efforçait d'accomplir avec des éléments de base simples quelque chose de plus complexe. En inversant ce processus, il retrouvait à travers l'abstraction des constellations qui, pour lui, faisaient sens. La découverte du fait de la géométrique peut également contenir des émotions, et le doigt même devenait à partir de ce moment-là important. Ce qu'il garde de la sculpture classique et académique était la valeur importante qu'il attribuait à l'espace vide ou négatif. Vous voyez une sculpture qu'on voit que le in-between est très important pour lui. Son travail était une leçon importante ou should be une leçon importante pour chaque architecte et quelque chose qui m'a marqué dans mon parcours. Je montre une image de Germaine Richier et derrière c'est ma mère Eva. Avec ma mère Eva, également disciple de Germaine Richier, il vivait pendant 10 ans à Paris avant qu'ils n'investissent l'argent de la vente de leur atelier parisien dans une maison qu'ils construisaient à Lensbourg, en Suisse. L'architecte de la maison était un Chinois, Pierre Zölli. Lui, de son côté, avait passé 10 ans aux États-Unis et vivait alors à Zurich tout en restant un Chinois. La maison qu'ils dessinaient ensemble avec mes parents et dans laquelle j'ai grandi m'a profondément marqué. Il abrite l'esprit non conventionnel des années 60, l'être excentrique de Pierre Zölli et de celui de mes parents, consistant dans un mélange exquis, nourri également de la culture française, californienne et suisse. On peut comprendre que ça durait un peu de temps pour moi d'analyser tout ça. Et je pense maintenant j'ai assez de distance et je pense que je peux aussi en profiter. La maison des parents de mon partenaire, Andreas Fuhrimann, dont les deux parents étaient architectes, est issue dans la même époque et montre des parallèles intéressantes. Mais cela nous mènerait trop loin. Ceci en guise d'une brève introduction sur mes racines parisiennes. Je viens à ma conférence. Ayant été habituée des dernières années à l'enseignement dans un cadre international à Berlin, j'ai davantage l'habitude de parler en anglais. Langue que j'utiliserai également pour cette conférence. Veuillez m'en excuser, je le regrette vraiment, ayant eu pendant toute mon enfance le français dans mes oreilles. I will now continue in English, alternating between theoretical text and photographs of our buildings to illustrate the theory with short comments to the pictures. Since not all of you are architects, I assume I will focus on images rather than drawings. The focus of my lecture is nuance and ambivalence, the complexity of sensual simplicity. In Christian theology, sensuous pleasure has wrongly been equated with sexual lust and demonized. This is probably one of the reasons why many people find it still difficult to address the issue of sensuousness without a feeling of unease. I show you here a project we did at the seaside of the lake of Zurich. And it's a picture of Pippi Lotterist, a very good friend of us. And, of course, well known for her very sensuous videos. And the pavilion we did is just a little building for restoration and toilets. Without sensuousness, in space we would wither and become miserable. It is undoubtedly a source of cultural enrichment, but where does it originate from? Itself. Obviously we can't survive even in a prison, but it is not a life of human dignity, and even less a fulfilling one. What is the correct dose of sensuousness to provide a feeling of comfort, but yet with neither overstrains the senses nor leaves them parched? This is a question that has long driven us, although unfortunately it would also seem to be a question that too few architects ask themselves, otherwise their spatial interiors and urban exteriors would look different. Josef Frank, the Austrian architect, wrote in 1932, "What the purpose of a house is cannot be expressed in words. It is namely not there to cook, eat, work and sleep in, but rather to live in. Between the terms cooking, eating, sleeping, working and living is the thing we call architecture." I show you here the cover of our book. I saw that you can buy it out at the reception or at the Lars Miller Publishers Verlag in the web shop. When, therefore, does a house become architecture? 4 years ago, we gave our first book the somewhat cryptic title, "What Anchors a House in Itself?" The enigmatic title, by the way, was inspired by a text by Kurt W. Foster, written for the book, and is in fact a question, namely, what anchors a house in itself without it being blind for its surroundings and its users? This blindness for the place and the people who use it is undoubtedly due to the functionalist vision of heroic modernism and the abnormal developments of technical progress. I show you here just two images of the first house we built together, Andreas and me. And it's also the house where Pippi Lotterist lives and Hedy Graber. I think Olivier knows her very well. And it's for a house for 4 parties, and it's in Zurich, and it's at the edge of the woods, looking down to the city. What therefore should a house or an apartment achieve in order for it to not simply serve as an abode where everyday activities are undertaken? How does a building design have to be in order for it to enable an individual life plan, or even to encourage such a life plan and not descend into simple being a place to lodge? In other words, what is architecture? After all, many things are constant in any building. We all build spaces that consist of floors, ceilings and walls, stairs and openings, which offer protection and enable social living. For this reason, architecture is always a social endeavor. After all, the task at hand is to create a feeling of being cradled in the world, a highly challenging task, and one which in the best case provides an existential foothold. You see here the living room of Pippi Lotterist and the double-height kitchen. She's a very passionate liver. She loves to change everything all again. This is what makes everyday matters so crucial, and the process of dealing with them so exciting and varied and never ever boring. The feeling of living in an area that continually strives to change itself often robs us of any feeling of easing tranquility. Sorry. The Japanese architect Kazuo Shinohara, who during his lifetime only built apartments and who described that building form as the supreme discipline, wrote in 1970, "Does this strange feeling of restlessness one experiences in contemporary conceptions of the apartment block not largely originate in the division between human emotion and social condition? One rarely experiences places or houses where a strong human feeling has been captured because all of the methods are centered on one aspect or another of social prosperity. Therefore, an ostentatious display of the client's financial prowess by no means automatically contributes to cultural or spiritual richness." This is a cemetery building, also close to the lake of Zurich. You have seen the banners. The banner image is inside the building. It was a very important building for us because very challenging, because you have to deal with very strong emotions while seeing your beloved ones the last time. The thing we are dealing with is the complexity of sensuous simplicity. In this process, the terms nuance and ambivalence play an important role, and which indicate that architecture is not an exact science like mathematics, but has a lot to do with intuition and aesthetic understanding, which in turn have to be nurtured through education and experience. Miss van der Rohe once said, "The ideal dimensions of a space cannot be calculated. Space must be felt." Here again, images of the other pavilion. You already see an image. And the special thing is that the building has actually not a front and a behind side. It's really like a sculpture where you can go around. It's polygonal, and it's always changing while moving around. A feeling for scale as calibrated to human existence is crucial, both in the small and the large. But it is equally decisive to have the ability to conceive three-dimensional spatial sequences that make sense in their hierarchy, are comfortable to progress through, and which in the last event are throughout like a film storyboard with moods of light, vistas and perspectives, colors and textures. Often it is the nuances that determine whether a building tips over into an unpleasant monumentality or whether it harmoniously integrates itself without being servile. However, we ourselves also consider that it is equally important to have a closeness to life's practicalities. This often injects an ambivalence into our designs and enriches them by opening them up to multiple interpretations, but without them sliding into randomness. Here again, the cemetery building with the image you already know. And for us, it was important that the building has a symbolic and also a kind of a sacral impression or expression, and the concrete wall is a symbol for fragility of life, but in a very robust way. That's how we try to use a language that every religion can identify with it, even atheist people. Siegfried Gideon emphasizes the separation of thinking and feeling as a key problem in modernism. Long before Gideon, Nietzsche had already encapsulated this same relationship in the term Apollonian and Dionysian. For him, the central concept of the modern was the ambiguity of values, the uniting of antitheses in a single principle, such as body and soul, or nihilism and the affirmation of life. We don't compulsively want to resolve this antagonism between reason and feeling in our architectural work, nor can we. But it fascinates us. In our architecture, we attempt to provide an alternative model, and we deliberately try to address it in our work by allowing ambivalence. Rationalists insist upon the primacy of intellectual concepts, hypotheses and theories. Countered by the empiricists' postulated dominances of perceptual experience, observations, sensory impressions and the given. We ourselves are less interested in the purity of the one stance as opposed to the other. The key aspect is to amalgamate the two opposites and to carefully measure the dosage of the one aspect or the other, so as to produce differentiations and nuances in the resulting synthesis. Here you see the house for Eva Bresenhofer in the mountains, in the Swiss Alps, in Fna. And it's written wrong, sorry. It's a house for international known gallerist, and actually it's in the middle of a really traditional village, and it's quite a miracle that we really could build it. But actually it's quite nourished out of the tradition in Fna, because they use actually only stone or concrete because of fire problems, and we also used these erkers, which makes a relation to the tradition. A form that is perfect in and for itself only establishes a partial contact to another space. The opposite, namely, an imperfect form has an effect upon its surroundings precisely due to its non-perfect speciality. This is why the close marriage between orthogonality and polygonality is so important to us, because it is more true to nature and creates a better feeling of an organically developed urban structure. I really like this table. It's very form we could have chosen also. Four pictures again of the house in Fna. You see how we work and with the models, always with models. It's really we develop it like a sculpture, but it isn't it is not a sculpture. We really want to make a differentiation between art and architecture. The Occidental and Eurocentric worldview, decisively shaped by Cartesian rationalism, has outlived itself. Both the social and the theoretical parameters in which we live are marked by insecurities and ambiguities. Today's growing complexity makes the struggles over specific terminology all the more urgent. Dogmatists, be they Palladians or functionalists, tend to hide behind consequential theories that serve as simplifications with which to evade the pressing need to confront complexity. This is artist's house we did in Lenzburg in the same time where the Piazzoli house also is and where I grew up. And it's the most it did really cost very few money. And we are very interested in doing also low-budget projects. In our projects, we examine quintessentially how the balancing act between apparently irreconcilable extremes can be mastered. On the one hand, this involves deliberately working with the imperfect and the impure, and on the other involves dispensing with any form of historicist or iconic reductionist tragedies. We view actively embracing the complexity of architecture to be a challenge, see the manifold meanings of the context to be an enrichment, and are fascinated by formal ambiguity. This is because it is the reflective treatment of contemporary complexity that determines the social relevance of architecture. The variables of this architecture, its real and cultural context, its spatial program, its form and architectural expression, as well as its sensual requirements, are all equivalently revised in the design process for as long as it needs for a spatial synthesis to emerge. The combination of utilizing economically efficient structures with haptic sensuous surfaces ultimately enables the realization of low-budget buildings with a high-end spatial opulence. Everybody is always very astonished about the bigness of that house, which has cost maybe 500,000 Swiss francs. It's really cheap, a cheap house. But with all, with every comfort. This is a house we did also in the mountains and with a really huge living room. In our work, we put particular emphasis on architectural space, which is a clear focus. We see space as the most important material which the architect has to work on and reflect on. Following the performative and the iconic turn, to use the common terminology, we could perhaps prefer to a spatial return, similar to the one discussed in the humanities to address the effects of globalization on the production of space. Evidently, spaces can no longer be outcome of deconstructivist or absolute thinking, spatial thinking. Working with images runs the risk that architecture degenerates into object art. With the disappearance of the old religions and the social transformations of the last 200 years, at least in Western culture, traditionally established signs and symbols have become irrelevant. The point is to translate meaning into an abstract, universal language without lapsing into a dull rationalism. I show again 2 portraits of my father done here in Paris because I learned a lot about sculpture naturally, and it has a parallel thing to architecture. Ethical decisions ultimately determine architectural appearance. It's not inappropriate to draw a comparison with classical sculpture. I remember how outraged my father was at the proposal to exhibit fascist sculpture Arno Breker in a Zurich gallery. That's when I became aware as a child of the implications of the corrosive influences of fascism on Beaux-Arts sculpture, namely sculpture that idealizes the disregarded human scale and that treated human imperfections as degenerate and not as a part of human existence. The same thing essentially applies in urban development and in architecture. The greater the scale, the more crucial it becomes to discuss problems like these. In the discussion, if the discussions always concentrate on the way things are done and not why they are done, then important questions get overlooked. Whether a piece of art or architecture acquires content and relevance depends, in the last instance, on its social moorings. Irrationality is a part of human nature and is, whether one accepts or is not, equally a part of architecture. Indeed, how we treat irrationality is crucial because it either articulates itself in architectural appearance to evoke appeal or feeling, or for that matter is so facile as to be unbearable. This is a holiday house we did in the Inner Schweiz, close to Lucerne, on the Rigi. It's the Queen of the Alps, and it has a sensational panorama on the Alps view. The core of our work revolves around creating livable architecture that meets human needs and excites human responses with calibrated distinctiveness in the built form and manifold visual spatial relations. And especially when the view is so nice, then you really are forced to have clear that you know what you are doing with the view. You cannot open up everything. You have close some walls. The starting point of a composition, wrote Hans Schorun, is the inner structure of a building project. The inner correlation of the living mechanisms that are to unfold in the building that is to be planned. A spatial mood is articulated by differentiated room heights and by different spatial proportions, linked to the materialization and the color scheme. The aim is to precisely adjust the degree of visual tension in each room and to correlate the individual rooms with each other in a three-dimensional spatial structure. Here the living room with the almost famous window where you can lie in and sit in and eat at the table. It's really a very comfortable place to be. Also at night you can look at the nice stars. This is again our house, and which with a diagram which shows the social concept behind that house, because that's very important for us. You see the red staircase, which is a double-height room where you can meet, and then the 3 apartments which are really made into, and everybody has a view on the city and view on the forest. Living rooms constitute, you see here the living room looking towards the city. It's the north side, and the south side is towards the green. Living rooms constitute the focal point, the center of a domestic house. Vertical exaggerations, niches, galleries, openings, or internal or external views can impart a constantly new and specific spatial choreography to them, elevating them to exciting everyday living spaces that are a source of constantly changing inspiration. The light that imparts the specific atmosphere to rooms is of central importance. Architectural contrivances can compensate for drawbacks in lighting techniques and other drawbacks too, to such an extent that the original deficit can ultimately be transformed into a special advantage. For example, in our house, the view is at the north side, and that was the possibility that we had not to use sun shadow, sun protection. So we could really do some details you couldn't do towards the south. And towards the south, then you have the conventional detail with the sun protection. I show, you see here quite a new project. It was never published until now. It's a house also in the inner Schweiz, Vierwaldstättersee, close to Luzern, and it's a very special project because it's built really into the landscape. And it's a long story. I cannot tell it here, but it's really special that you can build in Switzerland, so in the middle of the landscape. It's a special facade of the residential building. It's constructed in a local typical timber frame method, Riegel house. Maybe you know it. It's very common in Germany, but also in Switzerland. And its exposed timber structure is filled with plastered bricks. As a conspicuous character of the vernacular rural building tradition, it is superimposed and overwhelmed with the contemporary aesthetic. The similarity to the existing utility buildings and the optimal urban planning integrity into the landscape image has been achieved by the shape of the roof that is reflecting the significant panoramic view over the Alps at the same time. Some images inside. It's also a very, very Baroque building with a very quite opulent materials, but still it's always wood, plaster, and here terrazzo floor. The inspiration for this design principle comes from the spatial imagination of the Baroque, that predicated on a multilateral relationship between man and space. But we also owe a depth in design terms to the urban and architectural concepts of the Middle East, especially its urban structures with their labyrinthic alleyways, traditionally evolved graduation between private and public spheres. Regardless of the cultural and social undertones associated with them, the domestic houses of the Middle East possess spatial qualities that possibly served Adolf Loos as an inspiration for his spatial plan, and which equally have a particular allure for us. Gender relations in these regions have led to a spatial interweaving and to visual connections in the domestic dwellings that allow women, at least as observers, to take part in social activities. So this gallery up there has some parallels to these kind of concepts of houses. This is the staircase, which is all in concrete and quite opulent space to move in. This is another very special building. It's built in collaboration with Ugo Rondinone, Swiss artist, which you may know. It was really a close collaboration and a very interesting building for us. Actually, the process was quite inspiring. We used the privileged framework that our clients, not only the private but also the public ones, provide us with in order to exercise the core discipline of our profession, namely in each proposal to undertake an investigation of the specific architectural space. The fact that the majority of these projects originate with clients who, like ourselves, are at home in the world of art and architecture gives an additional impulse to this inquiry. It's also quite new, the house. I show you some more images. You saw the romantic element of that huge tree in front of the window. That was the place where Ugo Rondi fell in love with the surrounding. And inside you see also there is a sculpture, the chimney, which is a copy of a Georgian style chimney of New York, where he lives actually. But the sculpture is also functioning. He can make fire inside. Normally the sculpture is not functioning really. And his lovely atelier. I cannot go into details, that would lead too long. But we will also publish it. So now I show you an image of another aspect which is very important to me. I was a student one semester in Ahmedabad in India, and we went back with students again in the seminar weeks 2009, and I show it because cultural consciousness is a very important part in our work. Cultural consciousness is an essential part of architectural craft and means, as Wittgenstein expressed it, working on the perception of how one sees things. In the last instance, it is the reflexive effort that determines the social relevance of architecture. Architecture is socially relevant when it commits infractions and effectively exploits frictions for its own ends. It is only through the conjunction of empirism and theory, of utopia and practical proposition, that social relevance becomes readily evident. I showed this picture also because of the Indian professor, Mr. Shah, and I learned really a lot from him. He's more a philosopher, and for example, he never shows images in a lecture. He thinks images is destroying the thinking of humanity. So, but it's interesting to think about these elemental things. Another image about our broad cultural curiosity, it's we did a lot of traveling with our students to see traditional architecture, and you can really learn a lot from it without being a historicist architect after it. This broad cultural curiosity creates a form of silent knowledge, extended through the intuition acquired by processing experiences, and accordingly refines an ability to make quick and coherent architectural judgments. An interest in the paradigmatic social and cultural changes that are mirrored in art and life helps to preserve a sense of impartiality and feeds an eagerness to discover correlations, whilst preoccupation with global contents engenders differentiated local responses. The term mondialité, which represents an important leitmotif for us, stands for a form of global dialogue which, instead of erasing differences through homogeneity, comprehends variety as richness and nurtures it. In a lecture Alvar Aalto delivered to the Royal Institute of British Architects in May 1957, he spoke of the wrong concept of rationalization, the wrong use of the term economical, and the wrong application of the term ornament. For him, these three were the trois cochons which always manifested themselves together. He mentioned the long row of buildings he had seen in Switzerland built to a completely spiritless mechanical standard, but exhibiting extremely ingenious ornamentation. The ornamentation served to mask things that would otherwise appear too severe and inhuman. Aalto's struggle against an ever more culturalist society and for humanization of architecture continues to serve as a leitmotif for us and has become more essential than ever. Aalto's call, without art, life becomes mechanical and dies, is as relevant as ever, and we have the modest hope that something of his legacy echoes in our work. This is a project I did in collaboration with Pipiloturist in 1997. It's a bar also in the Engadin, and in Lower Engadin, and it shows that we really like to work with architects, and the work of Pipiloturist, video work of her are 3 bottles in the shelf where she has made some projections, and it's really nice. And we did the whole bar like a dream, where you can go in, and after a while, after drinking alcohol, you see the bottles getting alive. Another work we did is a conversion of the Kunsthalle Zurich. The second phase, we did also the first phase, the whole reconstruction was a collaboration with the concept artists Raksed and Elwin in Norway and from Denmark. And that was also a very nice experience to see the process of the reconstruction, see it as an aesthetic process, and everything was slowed down, and people could walk around. This is also a very nice work together with minimal artist Sol Luit in a chalet in Gstaad, and which was very impressive how sensitive he reacted on this situation, and it was actually very discreet, this kind of color coming down the wall. This is also a very new project. I show it only quick because it shows the influence of the region on the architecture. It's our very first building all in white. It's the first time that we use only white materials, and I think in Greece it really makes sense. And we also played with some ironic statements. It's kind of a little temple in a way, but you can also lie in between the columns. And we also used together with very expensive materials. The floor is marble, but then also to high and very roughness of the bricks and broken stone outside. And we used also the red elements to make a kind of contrast to the orthogonality. We are continually occupied with the dialectic process of design, with the conflict between concept and context. Instead of ending in a static state, this process between reality and ideas often results in each singular case in the formulation of a new and exact balance. An equilibrium in Jean Baudrillard's sense of other space and an inspiration that runs contrary to any project and any functional dictates. This expresses the fact that it is not the perfection of a conceptual program that is at stake, but rather the way of living that takes place within a particular architecture, or the molding of architectural space to focus on sensuous and practical needs, and which therefore explicitly elevates experienced non-perfection and not build dogma to its program. So this is the last project I show. It's published all over the world. It's very funny. It's really a little building, a finishing tower for rowing regattas. And of course they don't have money, so it has to be very cheap again. And we try to do it all in wood, also because the landscape is very fantastic, and it should be part of the nature. And it has a very hybrid character, this building, being a functional, active building on one side and a sculpture in the lake on the other. While the building is in use only during the rowing regattas, 3 weeks every summer, it usually remains closed and stands still on the reflecting water surface, transformed in an enigmatic sculpture-like house, with its shutters closed. This metamorphosis taking place every year was the ambitious challenge in designing the finished tower. An architectural manifestation for this prominently situated finished tower in the picturesque landscape is necessary in order to find the balance between the practical, functional and the sculptural aesthetic requirements. Here the closed side, and then on the other side when it's in use. On the left side there is the place where they put the cameras for the TV stations. Here are the juries. And it was really nice. You see inside we let it really pure and raw, and put all the energy in the facade to be it really a nice sculpture also. The more the contextual influence is minimized, the closer a building comes to being a piece of art that agitates, fully divorced from the usual practical constraints of architecture. This can indeed prove fascinating, but will, however, sooner or later undoubtedly be at the occupant's expense. We consider the conflict between concept and context, be it real or cultural, to be the essence of the design process. The oscillation between theoretical considerations and a relaxed attunement to life remains a venturous and highly demanding balancing act that needs to be permanently mastered. and which Denise Scott Brown expressed in her aphorism, "The architect who cares not at all for context is a bore. The one who cares only for context is a bore." So I show you only quick 3 images from exhibitions we did, and also that you can see my partner. It was an exhibition we did at the ETH, and you can see that we tried to make the exhibition like a little village-like structure, where every project has its niches. So we really tried to make the exhibition a sensual and special experience. And this is an exhibition we did last year in Venice, where you see we tried to make in a playful way addresses the loss of public space. It is about the reconquest of dialogical urban planning, contributing to the negative space between buildings and therefore a renunciation from the solitary objects. We do not propagate with that the return to the historical European city, but rather the bridge between the productive agility of the historical city and the present. Although this loss of public space has been complained for a long time, the awareness of the importance of the negative space, a lesson I learned here also because of Paris, the in-between spaces of the city, the span space between built structure is still not reachable and sacrificed to political and economic constraints dominating the everyday hustle. So this is it. I thank you very much for your attention.
Gabrielle, merci beaucoup pour ce beau voyage à travers ton travail. Voilà, s'il y a des questions dans le public. Soyez pas timide. Bon alors, je vais peut-être juste, si tu es d'accord, if you can add some words about your way to collaborate with artists, because what we see is architecture, mainly architecture. So maybe you can go more into details about one or two cases, as you wish.
I think I cannot generate, say a general statement about how the work is with artists. They are very different, actually, and that's also the nice thing. And what I appreciate is that they, of course, are very sensitive, and they are quite, they know what they want, and they have clear ideas what's going and what's not going, and I think that's fascinating. And also we have that also. We have also very clear ideas what we want, and sometimes it's not easy then, but I think we have a good understanding with them, and it's quite nourishing also working with them. Yeah.
May I ask where the house of Ugo Rondinone is located?
Yes, of course, in Würenlos. Yeah, yeah. It's quite not really a nice town, but there where his house is, it's really embedded in the woods. It's really nice. Yeah.
Close to the Emo Kunst.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why I think he, yes, very loaded.
S'il n'y a pas de questions, merci encore beaucoup Gabrielle Hächler et je vous invite à prendre un apéritif dans le foyer. Merci.